On Christmas Day, 800 AD, Pope Leo III crowned a Germanic king-emperor of the Romans, a man who never ruled from Rome and who presided over hundreds of fragmented territories. But this was not simply a misleading name. How did one title outlast 1,000 years of reality contradicting it? The turning point comes later than most expect. This is how a memory became more powerful than the empire it described. Ancient Rome's authority was built on a foundation of hard facts: a Mediterranean capital, a professional bureaucracy, and legions stationed from Britain to Egypt. The emperor commanded a standing army funded by taxes collected through a network of provincial governors. Laws, coinage, and orders flowed outward from Rome, enforced by a civil service that kept the machinery of empire running. Every province answered to the center, and every citizen felt the weight of imperial reach, whether in the form of tax collectors, legal decrees, or marching soldiers. Now contrast that with what the title Holy Roman Empire tried to evoke. By the year 800, Rome itself was a memory, not a power center. The real seat of control had drifted north, far from the Mediterranean world that defined Roman identity. There was no single capital, no permanent bureaucracy, and certainly no professional army waiting on imperial orders. Instead, power was scattered among dukes, bishops, and local lords who owed loyalty only when it suited their interests. Taxes were negotiated, not imposed. Armies were feudal levies raised for a season and then disbanded. The emperor might be called Augustus, but he ruled by consensus and compromise, not by decree. So why cling to the Roman label? Prestige. The title promised continuity with the world's greatest empire, a shortcut to legitimacy in a fractured age. But the reality was a patchwork of territories, not a unified state. This gap between name and substance wasn't a minor detail. It was the driving force behind the next move, a bold act of political theater that would try to bridge the chasm between memory and power. On Christmas Day, 800, Pope Leo III placed a golden crown on Charlemagne's head in St. Peter's Basilica, declaring him Emperor of the Romans. The ceremony echoed ancient imperial rituals: robes, scepter, the Latin proclamation. But the reality was pure medieval politics. For Leo, the move secured a vital protector after surviving an assassination attempt by Roman nobles. For Charlemagne, it meant divine legitimacy over his conquests and a title to rival the Byzantine emperor. But the empire he now ruled was no Mediterranean giant. Its power base lay far north, anchored in Aachen, not Rome, with a court that migrated from city to city, to Frankfurt, Mainz, and Regensburg, wherever royal business demanded. Instead of a single capital, the empire became an ever-shifting court on the move. Charlemagne's authority rested on personal bonds with counts and bishops, not on a permanent bureaucracy. He sent out missae dominici, envoys who reported back on local affairs, but these were a patch for a system with no central machinery. The map told the real story, a patchwork of Frankish, Lombard, and Saxon territories, each with its own laws, customs, and ambitions. By the 10th century, the imperial center had drifted even further north, and the emperor's presence in Rome became rare, almost ceremonial. The Roman title promised unity and order, but on the ground, power was divided among hundreds of dukes, bishops, and city councils. The coronation created a powerful brand, yet every decision Charlemagne made had to be negotiated with local rulers. The result was a realm that looked imperial on paper, but operated more like a federation of fiercely independent states. And as the generations passed, that gap between Roman image and medieval reality only widened, setting the stage for even deeper fragmentation. The Golden Bull of 1356 put the empire's contradictions in writing. Issued by Emperor Charles IV, this charter did not just codify the rules for choosing an emperor, it made the limits of imperial power undeniable. 7 prince-electors gained the exclusive right to select the king, 3 archbishops, Mainz, Trier, and Cologne, plus 4 secular lords, the King of Bohemia, the Count Palatine of the Rhine, the Duke of Saxony, and the Margrave of Brandenburg. The emperor's crown now depended on their consent, not on birthright or military conquest. In effect, the empire's top job became a prize awarded by a handful of regional bosses, each with their own agendas and territories to protect. This wasn't Roman at all. In ancient Rome, emperors rose through civil wars, senatorial appointments, or dynastic succession, but the idea of a fixed electoral college never existed. Here, the Golden Bull baked decentralization into the system, rewarding the electors with legal privileges and near sovereign control over their own lands. The emperor's authority was conditional. He could not pass laws, levy taxes, or raise armies without their blessing. The Roman label became a constitutional costume, not a command post, but legal limits were only half the story. Spiritual power posed an even sharper check. The Investiture controversy exploded in 1075 when Emperor Henry IV and Pope Gregory VII clashed over who could appoint bishops. Henry claimed the ancient Roman right to name his own churchmen, arguing that imperial authority included spiritual oversight, but Gregory insisted that only the Pope could invest bishops with their sacred symbols, the ring and the staff, since their power came from God, not kings. The standoff escalated to excommunications, civil war, and Henry's humiliating trek to Canossa in 1077 to beg forgiveness. The Concordat of Worms in 1122 split the difference. Emperors could grant secular authority, but spiritual investiture belonged to the Church. The result was, the emperor was boxed in by both law and faith, his Roman title more a bargaining chip than a source of true control. So, what kept the system from collapsing outright? The answer lies in the creative legal and cultural workarounds that followed, an improvisational politics that would shape the empire's next chapter. Roman law swept back into Central Europe not through imperial decree, but through the lecture halls of universities. By the 12th century, legal scholars in Bologna and later in German cities revived the ancient codes, giving the empire a veneer of Roman order. Yet this was law, as academic prestige, not as daily governance. Local courts in Saxony or Swabia still favored their own customs. The emperor's jurists could quote Justinian, but most disputes were settled by village elders or ducal courts, not by any central authority. The gap between Latin legal theory and Germanic practice only deepened the empire's fractured identity. Meanwhile, the Habsburgs built their power not by conquest, but by marriage contracts inked in candlelit halls. Their motto, Tu felix Austria nubi, meant, let others wage war, you, happy Austria, marry. By the 16th century, this strategy had woven Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, Spain, and the Netherlands into a sprawling dynastic web. The Habsburgs wore the imperial crown, but each territory clung to its own laws, diets, and privileges. The emperor's authority stretched across a map of family inheritances, not a unified state. This dynastic net looked impressive on paper, but in practice it made imperial rule even more dependent on negotiation and compromise with local elites. Then came the Reformation. In 1517, Martin Luther's challenge to Rome unleashed a wave of religious division. Protestant princes seized the chance to assert their own authority, breaking from the Catholic emperor. The 30 Years' War that followed turned the empire into a battleground of faith and power. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 put the final stamp on fragmentation, with Article 64 guaranteeing each prince the right to decide his territory's religion. The emperor's Roman claim now faced a patchwork of sovereign states, each charting its own course. But this wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment when outside forces began to test the empire's fragile balance. In the summer of 1806, the Holy Roman Empire's centuries-old title finally collided with the reality of Napoleonic power. As Napoleon redrew the map of Central Europe, he forced 16 German princes to join the Confederation of the Rhine, pledging loyalty to France and breaking from the empire. Francis II saw the writing on the wall. On August 6th, he issued a formal decree. He renounced the title of Emperor of the Romans and dissolved the empire itself. The text was blunt. Imperial institutions were abolished, and all princes and cities were released from their oaths. Francis kept his new title, Emperor of Austria, but the ancient Roman claim was gone. The empire that had survived for 1,000 years ended not with a siege or a coup, but with a legal declaration under foreign pressure. This was not just a political collapse, it was the final admission that the Roman legacy had run out of currency in a new European order. Voltaire, writing in the heart of the Enlightenment, aimed straight at the empire's contradictions with his famous line, "This body which was called, and which still calls itself, the Holy Roman Empire was in no way holy, nor Roman, nor an empire." Published in 1756, his quip landed not as a joke, but as an intellectual verdict, one that distilled centuries of political theater into a single sentence. Voltaire's audience knew the facts: a patchwork of semi-sovereign princes, an emperor chosen by electors, and a title that clung to the prestige of ancient Rome while operating from German heartlands. The empire's claims to sanctity, Roman heritage, and imperial unity had all faded, replaced by negotiation, compromise, and local autonomy. Voltaire's words echoed across Europe, capturing the mismatch between grand names and messy realities. But the story does not end with a punchline. His critique became a lens for future generations, raising the question, what happens when the power of a name finally runs out? Today, political brands still borrow ancient names to claim legitimacy, even when reality tells a different story. The Holy Roman Empire shows how power can hinge on myth, not fact. In an age of shifting borders and contested narratives, that lesson grows sharper and more urgent by the year.